I played my father's last voicemail one more time, expecting to hear his voice. But what came through the speaker wasn't him. That message held a chilling secret, something that shattered everything I thought I knew about my family. My name is Elena, and 3 weeks ago my father died in what everyone called a tragic accident. A heart attack while hiking alone in the mountains. He was 58, healthy, active. It seemed impossible. The funeral was small. My father, David Mitchell, wasn't a man with many friends. He kept to himself, worked as an accountant for a small firm, lived alone since my mother died 5 years ago. People described him as quiet, reliable, unremarkable. That's exactly what I thought too. Until I heard that voicemail. It came the night before he died. I was working late, missed his call. The message was left at 11:23 p.m. I remember because I checked the timestamp dozens of times afterward. Eleanor, sweetheart, it's Dad. I need to tell you something important, something I should have told you years ago. Meet me at the old cabin tomorrow, the one where we used to go when you were little. Come alone. And Elena, if something happens to me, look for the red journal. It's hidden behind the loose brick in the basement. Everything you need to know is in there. I love you more than you'll ever understand. That was the message. My father's words, my father's cadence, my father's pet name for me that only he used. But it wasn't my father's voice. The voice was deeper, rougher, with a slight accent I'd never heard from him, like someone doing a poor imitation of David Mitchell. Played the voicemail dozens of times that first night. Each replay confirmed my growing suspicion. Someone else had used my father's phone to leave that message. But who? And why? My father was found dead 12 hours after this voicemail was sent. Alone on a hiking trail 50 miles from the cabin mentioned in the message. The official report said heart attack, no signs of foul play. But if someone else had his phone, if someone else knew about our family cabin, if someone else knew he called me sweetheart, then his death wasn't an accident. I started with the basics, called his phone company, pretending to be handling his estate. The representative confirmed that the last outgoing call from his phone was indeed to my number at 11:23 p.m. on Tuesday night. Was the call made from his usual location? I asked. Let me check. No, actually. This call was made from a cell tower downtown, about 15 miles from his registered address. Downtown. My father never went downtown at night. He was a creature of habit. Home by 6 p.m, dinner, TV, bed by 10 p.m. So either he had changed his routine drastically on his last night alive, or someone else had made that call. I needed to see that cabin. The drive to the cabin took 2 hours through winding mountain roads. I hadn't been there since I was 16, but muscle memory guided me down the familiar dirt path. The cabin looked exactly as I remembered it, small, rustic, surrounded by tall pines. But something was different. Fresh tire tracks in the driveway. Multiple sets, from different vehicles. Someone had been there recently, multiple someones. I parked and approached carefully. The front door was locked, but I knew where Dad kept the spare key, under the fake rock by the porch steps. The rock was there, but the key was missing. I circled the cabin, checking windows. The back kitchen window was unlocked. Inside, everything seemed normal at first glance. Furniture covered with dust sheets, that musty smell of abandonment. But in the kitchen sink, I found something that made my blood run cold. 2 coffee cups, still damp. Someone had been here within the last few hours. Someone who knew I might come looking. On the kitchen table, I found a manila envelope with my name written on it in unfamiliar handwriting. Inside, a single photograph and a note. The photograph showed my father, but he looked wrong. Younger, maybe 25 years ago. He was standing next to a woman I didn't recognise, both wearing formal, government ID badges. Behind them, a building I didn't recognise with Cyrillic text on the sign. The note was typed. Your father was never who you thought he was. The journal will explain everything, but be careful who you trust. They're watching now. I raced back. To my father's house, adrenaline pumping. The voicemail had mentioned a red journal hidden behind a loose brick in the basement. I dismissed it as delirium when I first heard it, but now, the basement was cluttered with decades of accumulated belongings. Boxes of my childhood memories, holiday decorations, old furniture. But the walls were unfinished concrete block, hundreds of bricks to check. It took an hour of systematic searching before I found it. One brick, about waist high along the back, wall moved slightly when pressed. Behind it was a hollow space, just big enough for a red leather journal. My hands shook as I opened it. The first entry was dated 23 years ago, 2 months before I was born. They found us again. Catherine is 8 months pregnant. This has to be our final move. The baby can never know who we really were. Catherine, my mother's name. I flipped through pages of entries, all in my father's careful handwriting. But the story they told was impossible. David Mitchell wasn't my father's real name. His real name was Viktor Petrov. He'd worked for the government in some kind of intelligence capacity. He'd discovered something that put him in danger, and for 23 years my entire family had been living a lie. One entry from 6 months ago made my stomach drop. Elena is asking questions about family, genealogy. I had to discourage her research. If she starts digging into our past, she'll discover things that could get us all killed. The documents I took are still out there. There are people who would do anything to ensure they never surface. Documents. What documents? After reading the journal, paranoia became my constant companion. Every car seemed to follow me. Every stranger's glance felt suspicious. Every phone call from an unknown number made me jump. But 3 days after finding the journal, my paranoia proved justified. The black sedan appeared on Tuesday morning. Parked across from my apartment, 2 figures visible in the front seats. When I left for work, it followed at a distance. When I stopped for coffee, it waited. When I arrived at my office, it parked where the occupants could watch the entrance. I tested them, took an unusual route home, made unnecessary stops, doubled back on myself. They stayed with me, always maintaining distance, but always there. That evening, I called my best friend Jessica. Jess, I need you to do something weird for me. Look out your window and tell me if there's a black sedan on the street. Eleanor, are you okay? You sound paranoid. Just look, please. A pause. Oh my God. Yes, there's a black car across the street. 2 men inside. Eleanor, what's going on? I hung up and immediately called her back. Pack a bag. Go stay with your sister. Tonight. Don't tell anyone where you're going. Eleanor, you're scaring me. Good. Be scared. These people, they killed my father, and now they're watching everyone connected to me. That night, I didn't go home. I checked into a cheap motel under a fake name and tried to figure out my next move. The journal mentioned documents. Something my father had taken that people would kill for. But where were they? Lying in that motel bed, I thought about everything my father had taught me. He was always telling stories about our family, about how he met Mom, about special places. That meant something to us. But if David Mitchell was a fabricated identity, then those stories were fabricated too, or were they? My father, Victor, had always been very specific about certain details. The bench where he proposed to Mom, the library where they first met, the oak tree where we buried our old dog Max. What if those stories weren't completely false? What if they were breadcrumbs, leading back to his real life? I remembered his favourite story, how he met Mom in the university library, where she worked as a research assistant. He'd go there every day, pretending to study, just to see her. Finally, worked up the courage to ask her out on a rainy Thursday. In October. But here's what I realised. David Mitchell had never attended that university. His falsified records showed he'd gone to a different school entirely. Viktor Petrov, however, what if he had gone there? What if that story was the one? True thing in a life built on lies. If my father had hidden something in a place only I would think to look, it would be somewhere connected to our family stories. Stories that were actually clues to his real past. I had to get to that library. But first, I had to lose the people watching me. The next morning, I put my plan into action. Left the motel early, drove to the busiest shopping mall in the city. Parked in the centre of the lot, went inside through the main entrance. 20 minutes later, I slipped out through a service exit, caught a cab to the university. The university library was a massive Gothic building, 5 floors of books and study spaces. But I had an advantage. Dad's specific details about where he first saw Mom. 3rd floor, section QR, historical documents. Right by the window, he always said. She was organising files on a cart, and the afternoon light made her hair look like gold. I found section QR easily. It was a quiet corner, mostly used for storing archived materials. And there, by the tall window, I found what I was looking for. Not in the books themselves, but in the wall behind them, a loose panel, painted to match the rest of the wall but clearly added later. Behind it, a safety deposit box key and a note, in my father's handwriting. Box 247, First National Bank, Downtown Branch. Password, the date my real daughter was born. Elena, you are the only truth in a life built on lies. Whatever you find, know that every lie I told was to protect the only thing that mattered to me, you. My birthday. Of course. But as I prepared to leave the library, I realised I wasn't alone. The same 2 men from the black sedan were there, pretending to browse books 1 aisle over. They'd found me. Worse, they were between me and the exit. I had to think fast. The library had multiple exits, but they probably had those covered too. I needed a distraction. I walked calmly to the reference desk and spoke loudly to the librarian. Excuse me, I think there's a gas leak on the 3rd floor. I smell something chemical. Within minutes, alarms were ringing and students were evacuating. In the chaos, I slipped out through the staff exit. I had the key. Now I needed to get to that bank before they caught up with me again. First National. Bank was downtown, a 15-minute drive from the university. I took 3 different cabs, switching between them to lose any tail, before arriving at the bank. Safety deposit box 247 was in the basement vault. The bank employee, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, led me down the marble stairs. "You're David Mitchell's daughter?" she asked as we walked. "Yes. Did you know my father?" "He came in regularly, always very polite. I was sorry to hear about his passing. He spoke about you often. We reached the vault. She used her key, I used mine. The box opened. Inside, a thick manila folder, a USB drive, and another letter addressed to me. I waited until the bank employee left me alone before opening the folder. What I found inside changed everything I thought I knew about right and wrong. Photographs of government officials meeting with foreign agents. Bank records showing millions of dollars in illegal transfers. Communication intercepts proving that classified military information had been sold to hostile nations. But these weren't recent crimes. The dates went back to the late 1990s, early 2000s, and the people involved. Some of them were now senators, judges, even a Supreme Court justice. A handwritten list showed 12 names. 8 had been crossed out in red ink, with dates beside them. Dates when those people had died in accidents or natural causes over the past 5 years. The remaining 4 names included Senator Margaret Walsh, currently running for president. The USB drive contained audio recordings. Conversations between the conspirators, planning the sale of state secrets, discussing how to eliminate witnesses. My father's letter explained everything. Elena, I was the intelligence analyst who discovered that my own colleagues were selling our country's secrets. When I tried to report it, they tried to kill me. I took these documents as insurance and went underground. For 23 years, I've watched these people rise to positions of power while good people died to protect their secrets. I couldn't act without exposing you and your mother to danger. Now that choice falls to you. These documents could expose a conspiracy that reaches the highest levels of government, but using them will make you a target for the rest of your life. I'm sorry to burden you with this decision, but you're the only person I trust to do what's right. I sat in that vault, holding evidence that could topple governments, but I wasn't alone in the bank. They were waiting for me when I left the vault. Not the same men from before. These were different. Older, more professional. Government agents. Not hired muscle. Miss Mitchell, the lead agent said, showing his badge. Agent Harrison, FBI, we need to talk. They escorted me to a private office in the bank. Professional, polite, but I wasn't fooled. I was under arrest in everything but name. Your father was involved in some very serious crimes, Agent Harrison began. Theft of classified documents, violation of the Espionage Act. We've been looking for those documents for over 20 years. You mean the documents that prove government officials were selling state secrets? His expression didn't change. Your father stole classified materials without understanding their context. Those operations were authorized at the highest levels. Authorized by whom? The people being paid by foreign governments. Miss Mitchell, you're in possession of materials that threaten ongoing national security operations. Lives are at stake. I almost laughed. Whose lives? The lives of the people who've been covering this up for decades. Agent Harrison leaned forward. We're prepared to offer you complete immunity. Turn over everything your father stole and this all goes away. You go back to your normal life. And if I refuse, then you become an enemy of the state. I looked at these men in their expensive suits, representing a system that had murdered my father and 8 other people to protect a conspiracy. I need time to think, I said. You have 1 hour, Harrison replied. We'll be right outside. But I already knew what I was going to do. I just needed to make sure I could survive doing it. They gave me 1 hour to decide. I spent 58 minutes of it making copies. The bank had a business centre with computers and printers. While the agents waited outside, thinking I was agonising over my decision, I was uploading files to multiple cloud storage accounts, emailing documents to journalists, sending copies to foreign embassies. By the time I walked back into that office, the truth was already spreading across the internet. I've made my decision, I told Agent Harrison. Good. The documents are in the hands of 6 different news organisations, 3 foreign governments, and about 1,000 people on social media. The colour drained from his face. Miss Mitchell, you've just committed treason. No, I said, standing up. I've just exposed it. The next few hours were chaos. Arrest warrants, lawyers, news crews. But the damage was done. The documents were authentic, the evidence was overwhelming, and the public was outraged. Within a week, Senator Walsh had withdrawn from the presidential race. 2 Supreme Court justices had announced their retirement. The entire intelligence apparatus was being investigated, and I was in protective custody because there were still people who wanted me dead. But here's the thing about that voicemail that started all this. The voice that wasn't my father's. I figured out who it really was 3 days ago, when Agent Harrison visited me in my safe house. Your father left one final message for you, he said, playing a recording on his phone. It was the same voice from the voicemail, the deeper, rougher voice with the slight accent. Viktor Petrov's real voice, my father's true voice, which I'd never heard because he'd spent my entire life speaking as David Mitchell. The message wasn't fake. It was the most authentic thing my father had ever said to me. So that's my story. The last voicemail from my father wasn't in the voice I knew, because the voice I knew was never really his. But the love in that message? The courage it took to finally tell me the truth? That was real. And sometimes, the truth is worth any price. You have to pay for it, even if that price is everything you thought you knew about your life.